the Revolutionary War Museum on Thursday.
Yeah, that's right. That was the schedule.
My favorite
And she's leaving. She's not leaving until. All right, next year you do like a double.
Yeah. One year they started intense there.
Yeah.
So like she's done a lot.
Did you ever go to opening day? Did you ever go to opening day?
I haven't been to opening. I don't think I've ever been. You were there yesterday.
No, I mean, I see the
Half my family still lives here. So I was going to say I go to a game or two a year, but it has to be about 5 6 months. But I love it. Can I ask everyone to be seated? Yeah. Because we have the wonderful honor of having any number of our students who are going to share with us today. And I know how excited they are to get back to class. So if we could do this just as we start, if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to ask Kim to start. We're going to go this way and introduce ourselves, and then we'll go through exactly where we're going to be today. So, Kim, if you would.
Sure. Great. Good morning. I'm Kim Harris. I'm chair of the Modern Language Department, and I'm here with our upper school students who will talk a little bit about the Spanish exchange later this morning.
Great.
Shane Gensler, head of middle school and father of 2 kids in the lower school. I'll keep it quick.
Tim Lightman, head of the lower school.
Jay, if you would.
Yeah, no,
Oh, everyone. I'm Jay Capper. I'm Jay Capper. I have 3 kids at Chipley, 1 in each school. So Alex, who's speaking. My daughter just got into Northwestern, and my son is in middle school.
I'm with you on Danny.
And they're related. We'll come back to the kids, but we'll skip them right now.
I'm Allison Kreiser. I have Jackson in 4th and Isabella in 1st, and then 2 in the queue.
Look at this one.
Yeah, she's ready. She's applying today.
What it's going to take her.
I'm Ann Vasquez. I have Sylvia in 2nd and Jack in 1st.
Thanks.
Hi, Sharon Russell, Director of Student Support and Positive Education.
Maren Smith. I have Charlotte in 10th and Olive in 7th.
Elizabeth Norris, I have Declan in 10th, Evan in 8th, and Finnegan in 4th.
Beth Matthew, I have Allison in 10th and Jacqueline in 2nd.
Joe Prizer, Allison's husband, Jackson's dad.
And two along the way.
I'm from Jackson. I have Claire in 1st. Beth Smith. I have Carter in 1st.
Suzanne Gallo, I have Hunter in 10th. Tiffany Green, I have Cleve in 10th.
Bill Bergen, Katie's in 9th grade and Kyle's in 6th grade.
Wow.
Betsy Block, Associate Director of Development. I have Davis in 11th and Rory in 8th.
I'm Josie Burry, and Director of Development.
Hi, Katie Culver. I have 1 in 2nd, 5th, and 1 coming in 8th next year.
Hi, Evie Clemens, Director of Enrollment, and I have a son in 5th grade.
Andrea Harvey, I have Kirsten pre-K and RJ in 1st grade.
Would you mind that?
Yeah, Adam Wheatevitz, CFO. Lexi's in 10th grade. Nick, who graduated 2 years ago.
Val, would you mind?
Val Dillard, I'm Steve's assistant.
Val is the one who runs the school.
Courtney Daly, I'm the lower school admissions director, and I have 4 kids at Chipley, and in just about 2 months, I'll only have 3 kids at Chipley, which I just can't.
And a year plus ago, you had 5. So
I know, it's happening fast.
Sue Mannix, Associate Head of School for Strategic Initiatives, and we have a son graduating.
Betsy Olashinsky, and I have someone graduated 12 years
It's about 12 years. that's right, but that's what I thought. So it's okay. Travis.
I'm Travis, and I stay behind the scenes.
and he makes the scenes work for us. So listen, it's wonderful to welcome you here. And what's clear to me is when we have students speak, we have parents show up. So next fall, first one, we're going to have 830 students speak. Here's for this, we'll look at the mission and commitment statement. I want to mention right here that we've made 2 appointments that I want you to be aware of. You'll get an email or a letter later today that will announce the appointment of Brandon Jacobs as our Director of Diversity and Inclusion. There are members of the committee who actually here. It was, I think, a terrifically successful process. He's both a graduate of Hill School, but he also is the Director of Diversity and Inclusion there at this particular point. He's a dynamic, bright, talented guy. He'll be around this spring throughout, and I hope that when you get to see him, you'll welcome him. And I think we were looking for an Associate Director of Positive Education to further integrate that. We have, and Cher, maybe you want to say a word or two about it, but we've hired a wonderful, person in this area who's done her training at Penn, who's been a teacher up at Wyoming Seminary, Erin Griffin. Do you want to say anything else?
Sure. So Erin Griffin, as Steve mentioned, did her master's at the No Math program, which is the one that was started by Marty Seligman related to positive psychology. And she and I and Sue Mannix in the back will be headed to Australia on Monday for the Positive Education Schools Conference at the Geelong Grammar School, which is celebrating its 10th year of positive education. So we're going to the conference. Erin is actually presenting there, and then we will be touring the school and meeting with their directors and their staff and seeing what they've been doing for 10 years, what's gone well, what hasn't, what we can learn from them and their programs. So though I'm not a good flyer, I'm pushing forward and we're going.
She's dreading this flight.
She's fantastic once we're on the ground. So we're really looking forward to it.
Anyway, so we'll talk more about that. We're going to hear, from our division heads, although Margaret's not actually here, but Kim will step in and introduce them. We'll do that by division. Lower school will go first, middle school, then upper. We'll hear just a little bit more perhaps about positive education. Sue will talk just a minute or two about our 125th, which in case you don't know, it is this coming year. And for us, it's about engagement and involvement and all of those things. I'll talk a little bit about and show some slides from when Sunny and I were in China for about 2 weeks just over spring break. It was a terrific experience. And here's the mission. Does anybody not know it at this point? I hope everybody realizes that first and foremost we're committed to being a school that talks about and is committed to educational excellence, love of learning, and compassionate participation in the world. And it's the integration of the 3 that make us who we are. And as we do that, our objective of putting that is to create an environment where all members of the community are engaged, feel respect and value, grow as individuals, strive for excellence, and have the opportunity to do their best work. We honor and value all differences and are committed to being a safe and inclusive environment. That's at the heart of it. By the way, that's at the heart of what positive education is. We'll come back to that. But any questions so far? Great. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to, at this particular point, I'm going to simply ask Tim if he'd be kind enough to take a moment and introduce our lower school. And he's going to say a word or two about lower school before he does that. And then we'll go straight from the lower school kids talking about their projects to the middle school, and then Kim will introduce the upper school kids.
And I'm going to be quick because I thought I only had 2 minutes. So it's hard to believe the end of the year is actually coming up. So there's a lot of end of the year events that are coming up, a lot of public speaking. In 5th grade, they actually made it through sexual or sex education unit safely. They're gearing up for their study of ancient Greece. We've actually added a trip this year to the Met, which will lead into the Laurels, which we've revised a little bit. Kids are going to create their own city-states based on everything they've learned throughout the year, studying ancient civilizations. In 4th grade, they are beginning to work with young playwrights in a partnership to work on their end-of-year play, which they actually write and stage with young playwrights and create it and then perform it. In 3rd grade, they finished bagels and bios. They're starting their immigration unit. So they will do their Ellis Island simulation. They will be going to Ellis Island. And then at the end of the year, we actually added a new trip to Cape May, which is connected to a research project that the kids are doing, writing about animals that live, wildlife and animals that live in and around the water. They'll be going to a nature preserve and whale watching. And then 2nd grade on Monday, and I have a 2nd grader, she's very excited. They are picking their Desert Zoo animals on Monday, and they will be doing their Desert Zoo presentation to the whole school at the end of the year after they write up their papers. 1st grade this year is doing something new. They're doing a poetry reading, and we're beginning the poetry unit now. They're going to be doing writing, and then they're going to be doing a kind of a poetry cafe for family and friends in about a month. Kindergarten is starting Knights and Castles. Along with going through the process of knighting, they're working with Wolfpack, and they're going to perform a play. And then pre-K is in the process of picking a book in which they will perform a play. Not to knock all the other grades, but the pre-K play is the sweetest thing you've ever seen. So with that, I'm going to bring up Alex and Jackson. And they're going to talk a little bit about the colonial plantation. I will tell you that the crust does not actually glow in the dark. But they're going to talk about kind of the overview, the process, and what they learned going through this, and share some of this with you. This is an amazing project that the whole class does together. Each of the classrooms create their own colonial model.
Hello, my name is Jackson Preiser, and in 4th grade we studied the 13 colonies. And I think the purpose of the project was to use what we've learned and feel like what it really was to be in the colonial times. Our class did Boston, 4K did South Carolina, and 4E did Pennsylvania.
Hello, my name is Alex, and I'm in the 4th grade. I'm going to be talking about the process of how we made this colonial model. First, we got separated into 3 groups: a planning group, an economic group, and a senior group. I was in the planning group. Jackson was in the economic. The planning group sort of made a blueprint of the model. The economic group was responsible for things like trading, crops, livestock, and fishing, because fishing is very, very important in Boston, Massachusetts. And everybody constructed a building, so we each got to see how they would build buildings and if it was hard or easy. And we just really liked building the buildings as a challenge, and we had to work together.
Both me and Alex are going to be talking about the important economic characters of Boston. I'm going to be talking about the water. There was lots of water, and that was very important because of their fishing, and they had a lot of lumber, so that would be important to ship off boats. And the water would also be important to use boats to ship off other supplies to other colonies so they could get stuff they didn't have.
So probably one of the most important parts of all the colonies were the church. And they didn't really have freedom of religion up in the northern colonies, so you had to be Protestant if you wanted to really live here. So the church was like the center of life, and it was also called the meeting house. They would go every day Sunday, they'd have lunch, and then they'd go for another meeting after lunch on Sunday.
I'm also going to be talking about the harbor. The harbor was important to export goods, and because they didn't have a lot of crops, because it was very shady and damp there, so they needed to be able to import and export goods so they could get all the things they needed to survive.
The graveyard was very important because life expectancy was a little lower back then. And they didn't have as many diseases as the middle colonies or the southern colonies because it was colder up there, and the diseases would just not come and they would go because of the cold weather. But since the graveyard's pretty full, I don't know if you guys can see, there's some graveyards back there. It's because it was 50, 55 up there.
I'm also going to be talking about the mill. The mill was very important because you had to be able to grind up your grain to make meals, and it also had to be able to help move the water around to keep it clean so everyone could drink.
So the last thing that we're going to be talking about for the section of important economic characteristics of Boston is the houses. So everybody got assigned a house, and if it was a big house, then you just work as a partner, which really helped me. I think I liked working together better because if I couldn't do something, my partner could do it. So this is a fishing house. This is the minister's house. This is an inn. This right here, I don't know if you can see. One of my friends, Nadia, she did a really nice job in the back here. There was like a fence, I don't know if you can see it though. This is the blacksmith. This is just a normal house. That's a school and another normal house. And if we did turn this around, there's a really nice balcony here because this is supposedly going to be the rich house. This is the church, as Miller Jackson said, and these are the two Sabbath houses, which people would go have lunch after the first meeting on Sunday if their house was really far away. The bakery, which was very important there, and a regular farmhouse. It's not, it doesn't have a chimney, and this is just the house.
We're going to give people an opportunity to tour it at the end of the meeting. And if anybody would like to try to purchase one of those properties.
Something we took away from it, we had to figure this out. What I took away from the project was that I think when something doesn't go as planned because we use such thin wood and it was hard to cut with the X-Acto knives, that you have to improvise and use your brain to really find another way to figure it out if something doesn't go as planned.
Yeah, as Jackson said, if something doesn't go as planned, like the X-Acto knives cut stuff more than a cut wood. But what I took away is that you have to work together with your partner to make it work. Because I wasn't that very good at cutting, and my partner wasn't that good at building. So we had to, she had to cut and I had to build.
That's called collaboration.
And even if your partner thought that she really wanted to do something, you have to know what's best for the building and the class. And you have to sort of compromise. Maybe you can do one side of cutting and she can do the other, because that's what's better for the third economy.
That's terrific.
Welcome. Middle school, as Sam said, it's getting very busy. There's a lot going on. So 3 highlights just to share with these middle schoolers will not go home and tell you. In 6th grade, they've started the work for their international feast. So in the language classes in Spanish, French, and Mandarin, start to work on that and preparing, looking at foods and how to cook foods and preparing for the international night, which is coming in May. In terms of 7th grade, they are in the middle of To Kill a Mockingbird right now. They're heading down to the city for a tour in a couple of weeks. So there's a lot going on there. And then they also have their mock Brown versus Board of Education trial next week. So it's a wonderful thing. We have a parent who's helped us. We have a panel of judges coming in to actually act as the judges. There's a prosecution and defense, and they have to argue the case. And the judges really put them on the spot, which is wonderful to see. And that's linked into the Civil Rights Unit. And then finally, the 8th graders are heading down to the city in 2 weeks to see the Shakespeare play Romeo and Juliet. They are knee-deep in Shakespeare right now, so we get to take them out to see the play in real life. But I'm going to pass over to the 6th grade, and we're going to talk a little bit about 6th grade science and 2 projects that have been really, really important for 6th grade. So we'll start with the bridges, and then we'll go from there. I'll put you in.
So my name is Ben Bradlow, and I'll be talking about the 6th grade science bridge design. So the bridge design project is about learning about how compression and tension can affect structures and how they act while they're being affected by loads. And then, so what we have done so far is we have researched different kinds of bridges, and then we used this bridge design program, which we downloaded, which simulates an actual bridge. And then we used our designs to then make one-to-one diagrams that we're on paper that we're then going to use to construct our final ones out of balsa wood.
Can you try that video?
Oh.
And so this is, my name is Nina Beckett, and this is my diagram. So I was working with a partner, and so we each put our own bridge on the diagram, on the bridge designer, and then so we printed out our diagrams, and then we trace them on, we draw them out onto this graph paper, and it's a scale of like 2 of these blocks is equal to 1 meter, and they have to be really precise because what you do is you lay the wax paper onto over this diagram, and then you put the wood on that, and that's how you build your bridge. So the diagram needs to be really precise so the model is built correctly.
And what happens when you build bridges?
We build 2 sides of the bridges, which this is a side diagram. So we build 2 of these, we build a bottom one, and we glue them all together, and then we place them between 2 open tables, like 7 centimeters apart, and then we hang a bucket from the bottom of the bridge, and you pour sand or something heavy into the bucket, and when your bridge collapses, then however much sand in the bucket is how much weight the bridge can hold.
Okay, so hi, my name is Max Davis, and I'll be talking about the Save the Penguins lab. So Save the Penguins lab is about how heat transfer through different materials and molecules can affect that material and what's surrounding it. So what we did was we started out with this bag of materials, and we had to pick out some of them. So we tested some like coffee filters, or paper, or other things like that, felt, foam. And using this Logger Pro program, you can see how well each material reflected under a thermometer, so for a certain amount of time. After we picked our favorite ones, we used tape and then the materials to build igloos to try to keep the penguins, the ice penguins, the coldest for the longest.
So my name is Vivian, and to add on to that, when we were learning about these materials, we wanted to distinguish between them whether they were heat conductors or insulators. So the heat insulators help to reduce the rate of heat transfer, and then the heat conductors speed it up. So, and something that surprised me about the project was I thought that because tinfoil was a heat conductor, I thought that we shouldn't use it in our design because I thought it would just make it hotter. But when we tested it out with some of the other materials, since tinfoil is a reflective surface, it sort of reflected the light and the heat off of it, as well as, but it was also another layer to help protect, so that actually made our design a lot better. So, thank you.
Good morning. While I'm unable to share all the exciting events that are happening in the upper school, I am able to talk a little bit about the Spanish Exchange. We just completed our first year of the Spanish Exchange. Last year we hosted the students from Colegio Cristo Rey. And this is the first year that we went there. We just came back just under a week ago. So I'm here today with Max Warshel, Victoria Zarrett, Chase Sullivan, and Carolina Riley, and they're going to share a little bit more about their experience on program this past March. So without further ado, guys, you want to get up and share a little bit? Awesome.
So we went to 3 different cities. They were Madrid, Barcelona, and Zaragoza. And we spent 2 days in both Madrid and Barcelona. And we spent about 7 days in Zaragoza with the host family.
So we went on a lot of excursions. These ones were in, when we were in Zaragoza, little villages near Zaragoza. And And we went with our partners, our Spanish exchange partners. We went zip lining, went to see these beautiful like waterfalls and all these different villages. And then we also saw an ancient cave that had artwork that was like a really long time ago. And then we're going to talk about our most memorable experiences. Over the weekend, I went to the Pyrenees, which is on the border of Spain and France. And they have a national park called Monte Perduno or Bolivesa. And that's what's the mountain snow. It's really beautiful. We went horseback riding, and she has a house. My girl, her name is Helena. She has a house there. And it was really beautiful, and I had a great time over the weekend.
So my favorite part of the trip was definitely visiting cool and interesting places with my host, Inez. So we went to art museums, coffee shops, because I love coffee, and this is the Pilar building, which is probably the most popular building in Zaragoza, and got a lot of pictures of that and tours in the city. And probably definitely one of my favorite things, we did an escape the room, and what was really cool about it was all in Spanish, so I really got to practice Spanish with that. So that's really fun.
So, as I said earlier, we stayed with the host family, and I found it very interesting because it was a very like immersive experience of culture, and like how like we got to like live like a life of like a typical Spanish teenager. So like we went to school with them, we got to see what the school system was like. We tried like a bunch of local food, which is very delicious, and each night like our homestays prepared a meal for us for dinner, and yeah, we also just got to experience just like life.
So my favorite part of the trip was the relationship I built up with my host, Ruben. So we remained friends since the previous exchange. And we remained in contact, and when I came into his home, I felt really very comfortable with him and his family, and that really helped my experience speaking Spanish. I was comfortable. So the first photo it was on the first night. We took a mini tour of the city, which was really helpful. During the weekend, I went to one of his matches, which was a really nice experience. And we went go-karting afterwards. It was also fun. Yeah, and we remained good friends, and I think I will see him in May, which I'm really excited about.
If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Would you do it again?
Absolutely.
So you'll look forward to them returning here next year?
I don't know if it's the same people, but I think there will be more students from the same school, but that would be interesting.
Terrific. You know, I want to thank Kim for really beginning the program and putting it all together, but it's central to what our language program is about and having that opportunity. And I think you can see how worthwhile it is. Can we give them another applause? I don't know if anybody remembers the show. It was called something like Are You As Smart As a Fifth Grader? What I learned today is I failed both 4th grade and 6th grade. But that if I could get through those, I could have a heck of an experience as a 9th, 10th, or 11th. Would you do me, you know, students, you tell our story better than anybody else. Could we give them all a round of applause? I don't want to do this, but I do. I need to excuse you so you can return to whatever you have. Thanks, guys.
Come around.
Sharon's going to give us a... By the way, how many of you knew about, you know, we could be doing different grades as well, but one of the things we've tried to do in recent times is give parents a sense of the different program that happens for our kids. How many of you were aware of those 3 pieces? If you have a 4th grader, right? I happen to believe one of the things that's happened is at least as important as the doing it, is the being able to share the experience. And if you heard, particularly as the fourth graders were talking about the lessons they learned, they're lessons that we as adults need to learn left on an ongoing basis. So it's a good opportunity. Share.
So I already talked a little bit already about our trip to Australia, and I think listening to the students always reinforces for all of us how positive education is already a huge part of Shipley. When you hear the students talking about the relationships they're building with students in Spain and the collaboration and the work that they're doing together, that's all part of what positive education is about. Building positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and of course accomplishment and achievement. So just to tie that back together. So in addition to our trip to Australia, in May, Dr. Kowalski, who is the director of the MAP program at Penn, which is the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology, will be talking to the students in middle and upper school primarily about what is positive psychology, what is positive education. We've done, I'd say, sort of a soft rollout with the students in that in the seed classes, we've started using the terminology of positive education, but we haven't really said to the students, this is positive education. So we are going to be introducing that formally to them in May. And then in June, there will be a group of colleagues, myself included, and there will be absolutely an invitation extended to interested parents and alumni if you would like to attend. There's a conference in June in Fort Worth, Texas, that is the World Positive Education Accelerator. So this is a global meeting of people, and you don't have to be an educator to attend. Part of what they want are people from a wide variety of constituencies to come together and say, how do we build this movement for the world? So there will be trainings and workshops and keynote speakers, some of the big names in positive psychology, but then there will also be time for people to work together and think about, it's an appreciative inquiry approach, which looks at looking at discovering what exists, dreaming what you want, and then designing a plan going forward. So if anyone's interested, please see me. There will be a special invitation going out to anybody who had said they wanted more information at the Positive Ed launch. So we have a lot going on. We're working with colleagues, students, and we'll be working, I will say, more specifically making sure that you as parents are also as involved as you want to be with the program and know what's happening. So that's it in a nutshell, but please always feel free to ask me, or if you have ideas and there's something you've come across, I'd love to hear about it.
Thanks, Sharon. So I'll refresh people's memories for a moment. When we introduced back in the fall, we talked about this being really a year of focus in terms of what we're doing with our colleagues, with the idea that we're moving into much more in-depth work with all of our parents, with all of our students, with others associated with the school. And you'll see a much more active plan associated with that as we move into our 125th next year. And the neat thing about it, by the way, and as all of the people associated with positive education have said, so this has been fundamental to our school for a long time. But the neat part is that we now have things to hold on to integrate in different places that just make sense. So that's really what it's about. And so we're looking forward to that. But does anybody have any questions on that? You know, so please, Sharon, of course, is orchestrating. I mentioned that Aaron will be joining us, as Sharon mentioned it too. Be looking for more information about it and greater invitations to get involved with it. And my hope is you will find it in virtually everything we're doing, that everybody here, but really all of our parents, of all 830 of our kids, will find a way to be actively engaged in the process. What? Yeah.
Have you considered doing something that more locally? I mean, Fort Worth sounds awesome, but it would be kind of maybe an evening for parents.
So let me give you three things. The first thing is the thing in Fort Worth, of course, is not being run by us. That's a worldwide piece. I can tell you already that on that level, next June, Marty Seligman, who is the father of it all, and happens to be a parent, by the way, of 2 of our kids, but there will be a local event that is not Shipley specific around positive education. We'll give you more. And we are looking as part of our parent, I think this is what you're asking about, Mary, next fall to have an appropriate program. We're also looking at, by the way, one of the best experiences for our colleagues, even those who were reluctant to do it, was, and you may remember this, is that we did retreats last, roughly 3 days for we broke our, quote, colleagues into 2 groups of about 100. And we were out at the Shawnee Center out in Shawnee. Terrific experience. By the way, this place is actually committed full-time to positive education at this point. So we're going to be looking to offer that opportunity for parents, board members, and others. We had thought we might be able to do that this spring, summer, but the reality of how quickly time passes suggested that having it coincide with the actual integration of what we're doing makes sense. So put all those things. And by the way, in that regard, pardon?
And speaker series.
So 2 things about that. One is speaker series, but also there'll be a whole program. We're going to be putting together not a bulletin type thing on a regular basis for you to receive on all of this material. So that's where we're integrating all this thing. Any other questions on it? Does that make sense to people? So let's integrate that process, and Sue's going to say a few words about our 125th, which will include, again, the further integration of positive education and other things.
Yeah, it will be very brief. We're really looking at the 125th. There will be a campaign component, which Josie is in charge of, but we're really looking at the 125th as an incredible opportunity to engage not just parents, students, former parents, colleagues, former colleagues, and even within the community, those with whom we interact. So we're looking at kind of a 2-pronged approach. There will be some kind of signature events that are driven by the 125th, but there will also, we're going to try and integrate that into absolutely everything we do. We actually have a meeting this afternoon with the marketing firm we work with to talk about which materials, how it's going to look. But there's a really terrific flow between kind of the change making of the Shipley sisters, who started a pre-college school for women. It was really kind of unheard of at the time, and how that spirit has and devoted to the development of character, and how that spirit is still alive today. So I think it's going to be a really exciting year. There will be some opportunity to celebrate Dr. Pilch, which he does not like me to say, but it will happen. I'm sure you will want that to happen.
Can we make T-shirts?
Yeah, T-shirts.
Just with his face.
You never know. You never know. You never know.
There'll be a before and after, and I can't wait.
And the soft launch will be over Alumni Weekend, where we'll be previewing some of the creative material, and then it really will be a year-long through next year into the, I think, the Positive Education Conference with Marty Seligman will be kind of the last kind of event.
And one of the things we'll do, by the way, is we'll have an educational forum talking about anything from what's happening in education, what's looking at technology, where's the world going, and primarily I think of people tied to Shipley already, and so that'll be a great part of it. I sort of smile as I'm thinking about our 125th, and we look at our history, and I think about the campaign that Sue speaks to. It won't surprise you that when we get there, and it's right around the corner. And I'm excited by this, by the way. The campaign, for the first time in my tenure, is going to be strictly about programming, strictly about the support of our kids in everything we do. I love the new facilities we've been able to build. Don't get me wrong, and they made a huge difference, but it's what happens inside the buildings that really defines it. So you'll have a program about student support, campaign will be about student support, colleague support, positive education, integration, further integration of excellence, and really it revolves around our strategic plan. Do people remember it enough, the commitment to excellence that we've spoken to, and engagement and all of those things? So that's where we'll be. And our hope will be that everybody will find a way to get involved. And I sort of smile about this now as I'm sitting here and listening about it, and we're talking about positive education and all. I'm going to share a few slides from when I was in China. And as I sit here, I'm thinking back because Sue, mentioned the founding of the school by the Shipley sisters. And they were ahead of their time. And you may not know this, but in our all-school assemblies, our kids are hearing a tidbit of history about the school each assembly as we head towards the 125th. And they were remarkable people. Probably the best known, at least through the mid-time of Shipley as the head of school, was a woman named Miss Spear. How many of you have heard her name before? She was a terrific, terrific person. I'm not going to tell anecdotes today, but you can get me going. She was alive when I was here. She was 1944 to 1965 as the headmistress. And when I arrived in 1992, she was in her early to mid-90s. And all I'll say to you is that at that point, though her eyes were gone, her vision was absolutely terrific. And she was a person who was constantly ahead of her time, always thinking about what tomorrow would be. And the quick anecdote that I will tell today is that at the 50th reunion of her first class, so in 1995, we're talking about a room filled with alums who are somewhere around 66, 67, 68 years old. And this wonderful alum walks into the room. And remember, I've said Miss Spear can't see. And the alum comes in from behind and begins to say, Miss Spear, you probably don't remember me, but, and before she even said anything, it's as though I'm looking at Elizabeth, she said, Elizabeth, how are you? And then she said, Elizabeth, is your hair still red? And everybody looked and smiled, and then hysterics broke out because Elizabeth's hair was redder than it had ever been. And then this was the dialogue that said it all. Miss Spear said to her, I hope you're still finding a way to support the school. And Elizabeth said, as she should have, Miss Spear, this is a really different school than it was when I was here. You know what Miss Spear said? Thank God it's a different school. If it were the same school, you would want to have students in it. And then this dialogue went on. And that captures sort of I'd have lunch with her pretty regularly. And we'd be in this exchange. And she'd take a minute or two or three and describe the school when she first arrived here. And by the way, some of the things we talk about valuing today are things that they talked about. And then I'd get a minute or two or three to talk about the school today. And that was now 25 years ago. And then maybe the most important part of the conversation that took place was the question would be, what's the school going to look like in 10 years? The first time we had that conversation, I said, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Well, now that you've been through it, I've been through it 2.5 times. You understand of paramount importance in the school is, of course, that we meet the needs of our kids of today. But you can't do that without thinking about what tomorrow's going to bring. And by the way, that's of paramount importance when we look at positive education and other things. So we'll be thinking about those things as we go through the 125th, which I think is really exciting. And then I'm going to actually tie this. It's that some people won't know this. But before arriving here, Miss Spear was interned in China for quite a while. And so as my wife and I had the opportunity to visit China, I couldn't help but think about the closing of some circle in that regard in terms of experience. And not unlike the school, China has changed too since then. And with that in mind, let me just share some slides. Thanks. How many people have been to China? Great. So Bill, if you see anything you recognize or anybody, you know. I don't know about it. I'm going to be writing about this, I'm sure. But I went there with a strong predisposition about what I thought I'd see, what I thought I'd hear, what I thought would be. And I was 0 for 3. And let me say, I think we all do that. You know, well, from a political perspective, it's hard for me to be completely supportive of what I'll describe as an authoritarian government that perhaps, you know, communistic, whatever. Let me tell you, capitalism is alive and well, in every possible regard, and you'll see that in there. But what defined the experience, and I'll talk a little bit about, what do you think defined it? The people. And they were spectacular. They were spectacular. Anyway, so this is actually the first night in Beijing. It's just a picture of one of the buildings that we happen to be walking. You'll note there don't happen to be a lot of people on the street at the time, but I will tell you, of all the cities I've been in around the world, the traffic here is the worst. Absolutely the worst.
That's Beijing?
Yeah.
Look like Paris.
Yeah, no, well that's one of the reasons I took this job. That was Beijing. Okay, so this is also, we were fortunate to be hosted by three, on each day we were there, by they're no longer, they're 35-year-old people now, who actually spent time at Radnor High School and at UPenn in a program that's, you know, 20 years old. So, and it was one of the first programs. And so Betty Fu, who actually owns Hunan Restaurant here, helped put this trip together for us. And these students who got to know her while they were here are so committed to her in the process that they went beyond the call of duty. And you'll see a picture of them as we go. But this is part of the setting associated with the whole Old Summer Palace, which was, by the way, destroyed by the English and the French. And then a brand new one was rebuilt. This is Wei, who was our host that particular day, an incredibly bright, talented guy. And in Wei's case, they have two children. Please remember the policy has changed, and they're looking at a third. And they're concerned, and they love Beijing, and it's very successful. The smog is a challenge, and the hope of conceivably coming to the States, you know, in terms of opportunity. If there's one thing that all of the people we came across had in common, education was fundamentally important. And they had very strong commentary, by the way, about what they perceived to be a much friendlier college system here than there. Now, if you don't know their system, one day, one exam dictates what happens to your life. Really. So, anyway. So that was terrific. Anybody know what this is a view of? Forbidden City. The Forbidden City is the most impressive place I've ever seen for a tourist. It was filled with more people than Disney. And by the way, they now have a Disney there that's very successful. And it was absolutely overwhelming and terrific, and you can just see on an ongoing basis. You know what the Forbidden City is, right? And you know the Forbidden City, by the way, represented a philosophical time very consistent with positive education. Remember, China went through its changes from a leadership perspective, but compassion, understanding, and all of those things were fundamentally important when the Forbidden City existed. That's a view actually from across it, a wonderful place up there. Again, we're literally in the middle of Beijing here. I mean, you can't, park. This is the young woman, Meng, who was our particular host that day. She too was here, and she's in advertising now. And again, by the way, unlike here, their English, remarkable. Now, not everybody's English in Beijing or that we met with, but much better, all who had contact here. Anybody know what this is? Great Wall, and it is a great experience. Now, the Great Wall is spread out over thousands of miles, so this is a small part of it, but actually having the opportunity to walk on this part of it, and it's not flat, by the way, it's a very interesting place. This was dinner that evening, and you see Wei and his wife, and Hans, who is on the right as we face him, hosted us the day of the Great Wall. And just a really sharp guy and a really good person. It was actually interesting as we went into, and this is about an hour and a half, 2 hours from Beijing, where we are. As we went in, there are tremendous food places. But in a place like this, most of them are small, and they're apprehensive, or he was apprehensive about how it might impact a traveler's stomach. So guess where we went for lunch? Kentucky Fried Chicken, which was actually made us smile. And we've committed to taking him to Kentucky Fried Chicken on 46th when he arrives, when he comes back to visit. These are the memories they have. It was really, so it's just wonderful. And now we're moving over to Shanghai, and Eugene here is just the nicest person in the world. She had been an assistant, she was an accountant, but an assistant in a school, helped, did all the little things. I was thinking, Adam's still in the room? I was thinking of trying to hire her to replace him, but he didn't know that. No, she's just a dynamically talented, and they know the cities in ways that you couldn't, and we thought it important. I'll skip that one. So how many of you, now Beijing you got to see, what we showed was old, but Beijing is old. This is Shanghai. Very, very, very different. And Shanghai was a very user-friendly kind of a place. And it was just, remarkable. Again, another shot. This is from one of the buildings high up in Shanghai. It's like 100-something stories above the ground that we're looking down. But you can see, it's a pretty nice skyline. It's a pretty nice skyline. And this is it at night. And we had dinner with families here in a really special way. There were actually 2 additional families that joined us that night. These are Shipley-oriented people. The only one who's not a Shipley parent is that the individual on the far left, Tim, is the head of is the founder of an American-type school in Shanghai. And they were so damn welcoming. And so it was just, that kind of an experience. One of the parents here is actually the president of the Shanghai Symphony, and we got to go one night. It was absolutely terrific. And only coincidentally on that particular night, the 2 guest performers were lead performers here in the States. And it was,
Steve, the previous slide, was that it looked like the Australian, go back and one more. It looks like the Australian Opera House.
Yeah, it does a lot.
Is that what that is?
Yeah, no, there are a number of buildings. First of all, we're in an area where there are quite a few embassies, and there are quite a few buildings built that resemble others, and that's all. And brand new stuff. And I don't know the answer to the question. So
that's not where the symphony was?
Yeah, no. The symphony is about 40 minutes from here. Or maybe not quite. Well, it depends on how you go. Bill, if he's been there, knows. It can be 15 minutes. It can be 50 minutes. It's like it's not as bad as for example, L.A. in Shanghai. Beijing is worse. But during rush hour, forget it. So when we were in Beijing, just before I wanted to say this, the day we went to the Forbidden City. The Forbidden City part of it, the perimeter, is right across the street from their Congress building. And it happened to be that was the week Congress was meeting. And what they were approving on that day was, and if you followed the paper at all, is the elimination of terms for president. So we've moved from a place to where there was, at least in theory, an election for president, back to the place where he becomes an emperor, for lack of a better term. Because there's not a chance he's going to lose. Now, some people will say, well, what did people talk about? Were they willing to be open? They were. And I don't know if they worried about it, they didn't, but they were very open about everything. And I'll stop here for a moment and say, one of the most interesting conversations I had, and I've already written about this in my Heads letter, for next month, but it overlapped our visit with the Parkland March. So as we were talking about the Parkland March, and these people are passionate and supportive, and they look in absolute disbelief. 2 things. One, marches don't happen in China in the same way. For example, one of the things you can talk with them, but not openly and publicly, is what happened in Tiananmen Square back in, is that 87? That's my record, so whatever the year was. But they said quite clearly, they have no comprehension or understanding how the Parkland shooting could happen. Because in China, and understand this and they'll know, there are no guns allowed. I won't tell you nobody has them, but publicly those things don't happen in the same way. And so you sit there and you're trying to reconcile sort of the inherent conflict you have with the government side, but at the same time, what clearly, only based on this part, is safer. You know, we had, was it yesterday or 2 days ago, we had the Lower Merion Police in to train our colleagues. Now, for those who attended the parent session, anybody? A few weeks ago. So they were with us. And that's the way, during my 25 years, and I hadn't thought about this till Parkland happened, that's the way that schools have changed the most, is the concern you have to have about safety. And of course, Columbine began that in '99, but it hasn't gotten easier. So anyway, back to here. Lovely people. One more time as we're going. Just a terrific, terrific location. Okay, we've now moved on to Hong Kong. We're actually seeing part of right here is a wonderful center for prayer and other things. And it's right accompanies the Big Blue, which is a terrific, terrific experience. And by the way, the restaurants here, strictly vegetarian for what you be. And by the way, the food was terrific. But just wonderful, wonderful people. This again is part of what Big Buddha is. This is a fishing right outside of the town. You can see the things going on. That's the end of the village in that regard. And by the way, this won't surprise you. You have true poverty to extreme wealth. It won't surprise you that the fishing villages are not well-to-do. So these are apartment buildings there. This is the skyline from, in Hong Kong. It's pretty impressive, isn't it? We're about 100 stories up. There you go at night. I think it's just beautiful, personally. And that's, And the last slide I'll show you is the thing that I can't figure out to this day because it's something I will never accomplish. He was there. We were there. Now look, we had an open moment to take a picture. He was there when we walked by with hundreds of people. He was there an hour and a half later. Had never changed his pose.
He was stuck.
Except he was too flexible to be stuck. So, but that's what it captures the part is that it sounds funny. I'm going full cycle, but well-being is a really important part of their life. And not everybody, I think, meditates or does yoga, or does it, but it has a strong component there. And if you know Eastern medicine and those things, this won't surprise you. But when you actually experience it, and one of the really neat things is, as we walked, and we didn't know where we were, and we didn't have to. Even if people didn't know English, they stopped you and wanted to be helped. And I'll give you an example. We were in the subway, what we would call the subway, or something like that. And there's no directions there, and and you have to understand the system. And Sonny was trying to figure. A woman knew we were doing something wrong. Walked over to us, walked us to where we needed to do the right thing, showed us how to do it without saying a word. And it was just terrific. So, so the experience from my perspective actually brought two very different worlds together in a really important way as an educator. And when we visited the schools, we visited one school. The school we visited that Tim founded, if you listen to their philosophy, you would have said, I didn't know there's a Shipley in Shanghai. Because it was about the education of the whole child. It was the importance of academics, but really the belief in who they are as people and where they're going to go and all of those things. So it was very reinforcing that way. Anybody have any questions about any? Yes, Elizabeth.
This is kind of like multiple questions.
Yeah, that's okay.
I was curious,
one.
were you there because of the students coming here from China, like through that program that we have?
Yeah, so we have about 20 students. And so there were three motivating factors. The first is that the 20 students were here. And we hadn't been, Amy's been, but not to see their families. And Amy's sort of been talking to me about this for a few years and said, I think we should go. And, you know, Amy doesn't yell at you, but she's very compelling. And she was right, by the way, she was right. But the interesting thing is from my perspective, I was looking at this on a few counts. First that, because the families we've gotten to know are terrific. And we need to get to know all of them. And one of the things, we haven't actually talked about this yet, is we're going to be communicating with them differently than we do here because they use different systems. So one of the things we're going to be looking to do is to do all of our communication via an app called WeChat. How many people are familiar with WeChat? Okay. So we're going to be putting together, Josie and I haven't really talked about this yet, but out of our communications place, WeChat with all of the people we have. And by the way, we have families outside of, not just in Beijing and, you know, Shanghai, from all parts of China. And what's clear is, you know, this is fun, is how much they appreciate it. You know, I love when you all come to this and other events, and we're about engagement. What's really interesting there is how respected they felt by virtue of your coming. It's a different place, and if you've been there, I think you know that. But I could read a WeChat communication with the president of the symphony, and she said, "I can't tell you. This is the first time we've ever been invited to an event by the head of the school." Of course, I'm like, you can't tell you how fortunate we feel. And they have a tradition there where if you're having a dinner, they toast more times than anybody I've ever seen. Now, I don't happen to drink, but if you do, you should have an alternative way to get home. Because, you know, it's not kidding, is what happens, they fill a glass and it's wine, and they fill it to about here. And somebody comes up, they come around you. And we have pictures of it, but it's not, you know, they come around you and they say what they're going to say. And then everybody drinks the whole damn glass. And there must have been 7 or 8 or 9 toasts each night. And I was thinking, I was looking, forgive me, Ab, I don't mean to say, I'm going, Abby, that's like your 17th glass of wine. But it's the way the culture is. And you know what? There's something incredibly welcoming and endearing. And language didn't matter. So that was the first part. So that was it. The second part was contextually, is that Sonny and I have been looking at it on some levels. Only coincidentally, but our daughter's going to be married this summer. And her fiance happens to have been born in Harbin, which is in the northeast part of China. And it came here when he was about 10 or 11 years old. So we didn't get to that part. But there feels like there's a connection about the prospect of at least visiting the country. So is Norm. And then the third part is and Sue, I'm going to applaud, and Josie in this regard, when we're looking at engagement and involvement and integration, we've got to do it. And I won't have the privilege to be here when it next happens, but I'm going to be recommending, and this would be true wherever, that the next head and others travel there, assuming we continue to have a program once every second or third year on a regular basis. Yeah.
Could I follow up on
that? Yeah, absolutely.
I just was curious because I know there's a trip to China, you know, so far, potentially every other year. Would there ever be a situation where Shipley would consider students from here going there, not for a semester, but similar
So listen,
to
it won't surprise you that was, I'm sorry I didn't say that. That was one of my motivations.
Okay.
And that was one of the discussions that Tim and I had was, could we do something?
Right.
And the nice part is we have what for a high school level is a very good Mandarin program. What we saw in Shanghai, not in Beijing, but it could be who we were with, there would be a great opportunity. Ideally, you would be fluent. But realistically, Chinese is not an easy language, in case you don't know. Everybody there, not everybody, but a lot of people know English, but not. But even there, by the way, and I apologize for diverging, I don't have a great ear for language. And everybody thinks the same language is spoken in China. Well, in the northern part, you know, Beijing, Shanghai, Mandarin is the language. But when you get down towards Hong Kong, it's Cantonese. And it's a very different language, and they'll tell you that. So, you know, the common thread, by the way, is English. It sounds weird. Is that consistent with what you expect? No. So, third. So we're going to be looking at that.
Okay.
And I haven't had a conversation yet with our Chinese teachers or whatever. But selfishly, if we could get something started next year, I would love to see it.
And you answered my other questions.
Okay. Any other you know, listen, I have to be 100% honest. I love showing these, but partly it's, you know, just remembering a really wonderful trip and asking us to think about the rest of the world, because that's what we need to do.
Just very quickly, how does the government view the school and schools like that within China? Because I know that.
I think what I'm going to say is,
Just say it.
no, you know, let me say this. You know, let me say this, and I don't. When you read about people, I can't separate what I'm going to say from this. You read about the people getting prosecuted for bribery. So the attitude of the people, many of the people on the street, is those being prosecuted is because they didn't pay off enough. Okay. So now let's translate that to language. If you are in American school, there are different criteria. There are some schools that Chinese nationals are not allowed to be in. So for example, the school that Tim found would be expatriates from here or all over the world in theory. But there are also schools where you can get a license and Chinese nationals who want to have, my word, a Western education can, but it's more limited. And I think that's your question. Schooling, not unlike here, by the way, there are really good places and there are really bad places. And the more rural you are, the less quality. Here's one thing that's absolutely true. This is of the families we meet. The presumption that people have of the kids who are coming here is that their families must be incredibly wealthy. Striking. There are families for whom that's true. What they have in common is a willingness to sacrifice for what they believe is going to be the betterment of their kids. So, for example, slightly different, our son-in-law-to-be's parents made the sacrifice and were fortunate to be able to move here, whatever, however many years ago, 15 years ago, 18 years ago. Today, more and more people try to send their kids here if they can. And so very middle-class people stretch in ways that are beyond even what we see here to have their kids come to our schools. And so it's a very interesting thing. I wound up in countless conversations, you know, education. And it's a very interesting thing. And this is the one area that people are a little hesitant to talk about for what I think are clear reasons. But I was incredibly impressed. What's going on in the schools. In the school that we visited, we were there on a Saturday. Okay? So school itself wasn't in session. We got to spend time with colleagues and whatever. But they were running a program for migrant families where kids are just not ever going to have English except and other things. And it was terrific. And it was being run by the kids of the school. So it was as though your children were running this program for the migrant kids. Now that sounds like a very Shipley-esque kind of a thing to try to do, or it was real and it was impressive. So, any other questions? You know, I find this, you know, we're approaching the end of the school year. And it has flown, maybe not flown, but it has flown by. And when I stop and I think about moving into our 125th, again, I'm going to take the symbiotic kind of nature of Miss Spears' experience and the privilege to be able to go to China with a shared commitment to what we're trying to do for kids' well-being and the education of what used to be called the whole child. And I'm thinking to myself, as we celebrate that 125th, what we're really doing is reinforcing a philosophy, a belief, a mission that has long existed in good education here in the country. And fortunately, I mean, I've had the privilege to watch that and be part of that here, and I'm glad you all are too. So, any last comments or questions? The next few months, next couple of months are incredibly busy. and I know that. Enjoy every single minute of the different parts that go on. I'm hoping that we'll get to see all of you. Even you. Even, remarkable. Remarkable. At all sorts of events, but our auction is coming up. What's our date?
April 20th.
April 20th. Is that a Friday night, right? Do me a favor, everybody put your hand up just for 1 minute.
Just practice?
Just practice. Bill, I got your number. You know that, Bill. You know, so listen, I hope you'll be able to make it. It's a wonderful time. And thank you all and have a wonderful, wonderful morning. Thank you.